One of the most shocking events of the Second World War was the death of a princess inside of the barbed wire fences of a concentration camp. Millions passed through the horrific systems imposed by the Nazis, and prisoners came from all walks of life, but there was one royal who Hitler managed to get his hands on and kill in horrific fashion. The story of Mafalda of Savoy is an incredibly sad one, which saw a young Italian princess dead inside of Buchenwald, a horrific site of mass killing during World War II. 280,000 prisoners passed through the gates of Buchenwald, and over 56,000 were killed, including Princess Mafalda. The conditions there were horrific and particularly awful, with a distinct lack of food starving prisoners, and executions were also carried out there. Mafalda of Savoy's death is incredibly sad and was one which was preventable, but the Nazis chose to let her suffer. So join us today as we look at the brutal execution of Mafalda of Savoy, the princess in the concentration camp. And remember, as always, to support, please make sure to subscribe. Mafalda Maria Elizabeth was born in 1902, the second of 5 children to the King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, and Elena of Montenegro. Her father came onto the throne in 1900, following the assassination of his father, and it was during his reign that he would oversee Italian involvement in 2 world wars, and he also reigned during the rise and fall of Italian fascism. The King and Queen lived a rather unpretentious lifestyle, and the children were brought up in a rather modest villa outside of Rome in the countryside. They seemed rather normal as royal families went, as Elena the Queen would do much of her own cooking and cleaning, rather than relying on servants, as she had been raised in a small village and wished to instill a sense of work in her children. As Mafalda grew up, she was highly educated and was noted for being a good student. She mastered 4 foreign languages and was a capable musician, being able to play 4 different instruments, as well as taking a keen interest in sport. When she was around the age of 21, she caught typhoid fever, along with her younger sister Giovanna. Both of the girls were very ill and came close to death, and throughout her life she was rather frail. A number of bouts of flu throughout her life almost killed her, but the expectation was for her to marry a rich prince, to secure an alliance with another country. For royal families, marriage at this time was a very big thing, and as a young woman, Mafalda was linked romantically with the Prince of Wales and Crown Prince Leopold of Belgium, Leopold III. However, in a turn of events, in June 1925, she was engaged to Prince Philipp of Hesse. She met him previously at a garden party on the grounds of her Roman villa, and he came from a high-status beginnings, but was a rather practical man. He was a nephew of the exiled following World War I Kaiser Wilhelm II. His father was Prince Frederick Charles of Hesse, and Princess Margaret Beatrice was his mother. He was an engineer and an architect, and he studied both of these before he served within the German army during the First World War as a lieutenant. When they became engaged, Mafalda and Philip's commitment was a major turning point in European politics. It marked the first betrothal between 2 royal families who had previously been at war with each other, and it was the first since the war. To marry the Catholic Mafalda, Philip, who was a Protestant, had to give up all his rights to the future kingdom, and he agreed that any children produced by the 2 would be raised Catholic. They married on the 23rd of September 1925 in a royal castle, and the guests enjoyed the lavish ceremony, but the couple later hosted a modest celebration for the local villagers, and even attended themselves to celebrate with the everyday people. After their wedding they went on honeymoon, and settled into life in a villa in Rome. In 1933, Philip became the governor and province of Hessen-Nassau, and was appointed to this position by none other than Adolf Hitler, and the couple then moved to Germany before having children. In Italy, fascism had risen to prominence through the government of Benito Mussolini, and Mafalda had allegedly been sympathetic to this. It was a time too when Hitler was beginning to manipulate his way up to positions of power within Germany, and for the birth of their children, Hitler gifted Mafalda with the Mother's Cross to reward her. She did not recognise any gifts within the Nazi Party, however Philip was being cast into positions of power by Hitler. Hitler, through political manipulation, eventually became the dictator of Nazi Germany, and the Führer would seek to expand his empire. But he would build a dangerous and close alliance with Mussolini in Italy. Mussolini sided with Nazi Germany when the Second World War broke out, along with the rest of the Axis powers. This saw Italy in conflict with France and Britain, and at first this seemed like not an issue for Mafalda. She had married a man who was acting as a German prince, and he himself was a member of the Nazi Party. Hitler had honoured him as an honorary member of the Brown Shirts, the SA. This was a group of violent thugs who would disrupt communist meetings, beat up Jews and other minorities and further the Nazi cause. The Night of the Long Knives purged the SA to limit their power and destroy their leadership, demonstrating Hitler's own power, but Philipp became a general of the Brown Shirts. He acted as a go-between and a messenger in a sense between Hitler, Mussolini and Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS. Philipp would be included in certain meetings and would be there as an integral part of them, and he also built a personal relationship with Hitler. Philipp acted as an art agent for him, seeking valuable Italian masterpieces to be stolen or bought at obscenely low prices for Hitler's own collection. As the governor of Hesse-Nassau, he was complicit and knew about the Action T4 euthanasia programme and signed over a sanatorium which resulted in the deaths of 10,000 mentally ill people who were killed there. He would later be charged with murder, but these charges were dropped. It's been debated how trusted Philipp actually was because of his Italian connections through his wife and the fact he was a royal. However, it was Mafalda who attracted the attention of Hitler in a very negative way. He referred to her as the blackest carry-on in the Italian royal house, and Joseph Goebbels labelled her the biggest bitch of the Italian royals. Hitler believed that Philipp and his family, including Mafalda, were complicit in orchestrating Mussolini's downfall and arrest. Philipp was arrested in September 1943 and was stripped of his membership of the Nazi Party and was later sacked from his position. Following this, he was placed under guard and was transported to Buchenwald Concentration Camp. He was held under solitary confinement and was refused contact with the outside world. He was given the same food as the guards and was allowed to wear civilian clothes, but what happened to Mafalda, his wife, the Princess of Italy, was far worse. Along with the accusations about Mussolini's downfall, Mafalda of Savoy was linked to the death of Tsar Boris of Bulgaria. Following a visit from Mafalda, he was struck down by a mysterious illness, of which he quickly succumbed to. There was a belief in the Nazi high command that he was poisoned, and it was said his corpse turned black, that occurred in a similar way when the Greek Prime Minister was poisoned. Hitler also learned that Mafalda had received ciphers from her husband over the phone, and he believed these showed the royal couple were behind the death. Mafalda was arrested and placed under military arrest in Rome at her villa. She was then transported to Munich for questioning, then on to Berlin. It's assumed that during her interrogation the princess disclosed nothing, and what occurred next was extremely shocking. The princess was then transported to Buchenwald Concentration Camp, a site in which thousands of people were murdered and executed during the Holocaust and the Second World War. Buchenwald was a camp mostly for men, and Princess Mafalda was housed in a special compound for dignitaries and was imprisoned with 54 other prominent members of European politics. The SS wanted to separate them from the other prisoners, and they were given a special guard and were kept in buildings surrounded by large fences. But things went wrong the following year. On the 24th of August 1944, the Allies bombed an ammunition factory located inside of Buchenwald. In the attack, 400 prisoners were killed and many were wounded, including Princess Mafalda. However, her injuries were incredibly serious. She was kept in a unit near to the factory, and when the attack happened, she was buried in the debris from the bombing. As a result, she had horrific burns on her arms. Because of the awful conditions of the concentration camp, Mafalda's arm then got severely infected. The medical officers at Buchenwald then decided to amputate it, but after the operation things went very wrong. Firstly, she was operated on inside of a newly set up brothel inside of the camp, and the operation was very long. Whilst asleep, Mafalda was then left after the operation, bleeding to death. She bled profusely from the operation, which was being performed by an inexperienced and botching surgeon, but she never regained consciousness. But we can consider Mafalda to have been given a death sentence. The SS doctors inside of Buchenwald had a policy of delaying operations unnecessarily, in a sick way in their eyes, to bring about the death of the prisoners. Mafalda lay inside of the hospital at the camp for days with her burned arm, and it was during the wait for the operation that her arm became infected. Another prisoner working in the infirmary, who had previously been a surgeon, even begged the director of the hospital to operate, but he waited 2 more days as allegedly the headquarters hadn't approved surgery on the Italian princess. It was later that permission was finally obtained, and the hospital director's amputation of Mafalda's arm was slow, drawn out, and a huge ordeal for her. The amputation was performed in such a horrific manner, and there was no post-operation care or support offered. There was nothing in place for Mafalda after the operation, and the doctor just left her inside of the infirmary unconscious. It was that night that she bled out and died, and it's believed that the SS held off her treatment and operation for as long as possible intentionally. It would have been an easy solution for the Nazis to say the princess died from her injuries caused by the Allies and passed away rather than executing her or killing her inside of gas chambers. It was convenient for the Nazis to let her succumb to her wounds, and for them it seemed like a sensible solution, as she was an inconvenience, having a high-up member of the Italian royal family inside of the camp. After her death, her body was dumped naked in the crematoria, and a cremation took place. A lock of her hair was cut off by a priest, who then smuggled it out of the camp to be sent to her relatives. The death of Mafalda of Savoy was an incredibly sad one, and the neglect of the doctors to care for her after her injury was a death sentence. Like so many, she succumbed to the conditions inside of the concentration camps, and she was one of millions killed by the Nazis during the Second World War in this way. Mafalda was the princess who died inside of the concentration camps, and her story is one that deserves to be told. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.